Recording. There we- Hi, I'm so glad you guys are joining me today. Ilse, I'm just naturally crouching now because we made my camera lower. So I'm just going to do this for a minute. But welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. So many familiar names, which is amazing. I love baking with you guys every week. It's like the highlight of my week. I love coming here and hanging out with you guys. So thank you for joining me today for what is a somewhat complicated project. So, like, get your baking hats on, get ready. This is sort of serious, but today we're making a heart-shaped Valentine's Day cake. And again, for those of you who I haven't met, my name is Katie. I'm a pastry chef. I also teach baking classes here with my girls, which is so much fun. And we do a great project pretty much every Thursday. So come back. I think next week is Pavlova's. It's like the last Valentine's Day class. So definitely come by for that. That's super fun too. But yeah, it's so nice to see you guys again. So many names I've seen before. So thank you for joining me. If anyone's baking along, let us know. Ilse just shared the handout in the chat. So you have the full recipe there. And today we're going to be making a cake, a buttercream, and a glaze. And then turning that buttercream into a chocolate buttercream to coat the cake before glazing. And also we're going to use Russian floral piping tips to do some flowers. So it's like a whole thing, but it's really fun. And don't be intimidated. It's super straightforward. Step by step, we got this. So Ilse, when you're ready, you can come on down. I'm going to show you. Don't be afraid. It looks like a lot. But actually, these are all pantry staples, pretty much. Yes and no. But I'll start you over here. So I have sections here a little bit. So for my cake, I've got some pretty basic stuff. I've got eggs, sugar, this is my wet stuff. I've got buttermilk, or we'll talk about a substitution, and I also have my oil in here, just a neutral oil like vegetable oil or canola oil is great. I've got some dark cocoa powder. So I love like a really dark Dutch processed cocoa powder. It's just like richer and deeper in color and flavor. So that's really nice. And if you're at the supermarket looking for a cocoa powder, even something like Hershey's Special Dark is really helpful. It just like really gives you that deep chocolate flavor, which is so much fun. And then I have baking soda. That's our leavening agent. Kosher salt. And it seems like a lot of kosher salt, but chocolate cake really does need salt. So don't shy away from it. I promise you it's going to be like so delicious, so fudgy, so well-rounded. So that's really good. I've got some warm water, or you can use coffee. And I do have a little bit of instant espresso that I might add in there just for a little boost in that chocolate flavor. And then all-purpose flour. So like very basic stuff for our chocolate cake. Nothing crazy. We're not melting chocolate for that or anything. Then, as we come into our buttercream, so American style buttercream, so easy. Confectioner sugar, milk. I've got my favorite vanilla bean paste. If you if you've been in classes with me before, you know I'm like obsessed with vanilla bean paste. I just like carry it in my purse. So this is really good to kind of give us that lovely aromatic flavor, and also it gives you those little flecks of vanilla bean running through your buttercream as well, which is so nice. Butter. Your butter should be at room temperature for this. And room temperature doesn't have to be like super, super soft, but you can see I can squeeze it. That's the goal. Oh, welcome. Hi from New York. Love these classes. Used to bake and decorate taking Wilton classes. Oh, that's so great. Well, thank you. Welcome. A little bit of cocoa also for our buttercream because we're going to portion some of it out for chocolate. And then I have an easy chocolate glaze. This is basically just a chocolate ganache. So heavy cream, dark chocolate, salt, and a little bit of that same neutral oil that we used in the cake. So it does seem like, kind of like a large breadth of ingredients, but a lot of it is repeats, so like nothing too crazy. If you are looking for a substitute for buttermilk, because I know it's a small amount of buttermilk, who has half a cup of buttermilk just sitting around? You can actually use half sour cream and half whole milk. I find that makes a really nice substitute. And I'm actually using that today. I've got my sour cream in here and I've got whole milk. So just half and half sour cream or even Greek yogurt and then whole milk. That's a nice alternative. All right, to get into the fancy stuff. So we're going to be baking our cake in this lovely heart-shaped pan. This is from Michael's, and it's lovely, and it's non-stick, and it's really good. So I love having this. I've also got some gel colors, totally optional, but if you want to make flowers with me, I have gel colors for that as well. The heart pan, I believe, is a 9-inch. This is a 9-inch heart pan. It's probably on sale right now too, which is nice. I feel like they always put all the holiday stuff on sale so fast, which I appreciate. Then I have some tips. I know, you're like, wow, there's more stuff. There's tips. So I have, this is a Russian tip. This is a floral tip. And if you haven't used these before, you can see how it has like all the petals kind of outlined on the tip itself. And it's amazing. You pipe the buttercream and it just makes a flower. So if you haven't used these, you get a pack usually of like 10 or even more. And it's all different flowers. You get tulips and roses, and you could pipe your own buttercream flowers so easily. And they always look so good. So that's nice. I've got a little open star tip just in case I wanted to do some swirls and things. Just kind of a fun touch. And also a leaf tip to pipe little leaves and make those green. And then I grabbed some dragees just for fun. Make it a little festive for Valentine's Day. Piping bags. I think that's pretty much it. As we go through, I'll also be using bowls and whisks, a stand mixer probably for the buttercream, things like that. An egg substitute. Actually, so for this cake, I've actually made it without the eggs, funny enough. So you can try that. That's one alternative. I have made this cake just completely without eggs before, but also, any sort of vegan alternatives that you like, whether it's like the flaxseed situation or anything like that, you could definitely experiment with that as well. Are we ready? We're diving in. So your oven, if you are baking along, should be preheated to 350 degrees. This cake bakes up pretty fast. It's like 35 minutes, something like that. And it is just a single layer cake. We're not stacking this cake. So that's really nice as well. All right, so I'm going to get my toppings out of the way. We're going to dive right into the cake layer. And this is one bowl. This is a one bowl cake. Doesn't get easier than this. And I'm so glad somebody got their vanilla bean paste. I'm very excited for you. You're going to fall in love with it, I promise. $11.99, but 30% online. Oh, great. Oh, perfect. Welcome from Washington. All right, so for this cake, we're going to start with our wet stuff. So I've got my eggs here. They can be room temperature. They don't have to be. This cake is like totally fuss-free, super easy breezy. Comes together in a couple of minutes. And quite honestly, it's probably my favorite, most delicious, fudgiest chocolate cake. It's super, super good, particularly with the ganache on top. It's like extra, extra good. So hopefully you'll enjoy that. So you can see I got my sour cream in there and my milk. That's my buttermilk substitute, but you can use whole buttermilk as well. And I'm going to add my sugar to this. We're just going to whisk this all together. So whisking the wet stuff first, just make sure your eggs are nicely broken up. You kind of make sure everything is really nicely combined. And this way, when you add your dry ingredients, you're not overworking the batter in the process. Just kind of working them in just a little bit. Well, there you go. Yes. You've got the recipe there in the chat, if anybody's looking for it. So as soon as we're smooth, I'm going to add my dry stuff. So I've got my all-purpose flour. And you do milk with vinegar. I am not a fan of that, to be honest with you. I feel like it's so funny because I hear that a lot, like, oh, buttermilk substitute milk with vinegar. You don't get that same richness. It's not as thick. It's very thin. Sometimes it's a little bit broken. I really prefer to use either half sour cream or half Greek yogurt and then just whole milk. And it's so easy because it's like you always have those things, or at least I do always have those things on hand. And it's just a really easy substitute. So you can see I've got my dry stuff in and I've got my water. To my water, I am going to add a little bit of my espresso, and that's totally optional. You can use coffee for this if you want. And that coffee or espresso is just going to deepen that chocolate flavor, kind of take it to the next level a little bit. But I'm just going to slowly whisk this in so I'm not overworking my dry stuff. The more you work your dry stuff, and this goes for any cake, whether you're making vanilla chocolate or any other flavor, sometimes if you end up with something called like tunneling, if you kind of cut open your cake and you find you have big air pockets or holes in there, or maybe your cake is a little bit more dense and rubbery than you wanted it to be, you were looking for something really tender and moist, overworking your dry ingredients will really do that. It kind of builds the gluten and just kind of makes everything a little bit less delicate. So I'm just working in the rest of my water. And how long did that take? That was probably like a minute to make this cake. You never have whole milk in the house. That's tricky. You could use 2% if you have 2%, or even if you have a plant-based milk, you can use that too if you're doing a vegan option. That would be good too. It's pretty forgiving. Even something like half and half, If you had sour cream and water, worst case, I would do probably 3 parts sour cream to 1 part water if that was the case, just to make up the lost fat from the milk. But this cake, you'd be surprised. It's going to be good no matter what. I have full faith in this one. All right, so we're going to go ahead and line our cake pan. Our batter is ready. And I don't want to waste parchment, so I'm going to go like all the way in the corner here. Now to line my cake pan, I typically just take something like a Sharpie. If it's a specialty size or shape like this, I just kind of run around. And I'm just going to cut inside that line. So it's going to be a little bit smaller than my pan. And it's going to fit nicely at the base. And I'm also kind of getting that marker out of the way by going inside the line. And this is just going to help your cake release nice and easily, particularly since we're glazing it. And we want that really flat bottom. Lining it is kind of always a good idea. This is an extra insurance policy. Powdered buttermilk is also available. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, powdered buttermilk. And if I was gluten-free, I would just use a gluten-free all-purpose flour blend. You know, something that you love, a brand you've used before. Would be good. Oh, do you also do the sides also? I don't do the sides. Your parchment is, I don't know why my parchment is shiny. I feel like one side is shiny and one is not. Yeah, even if you don't love using parchment, you could just butter and instead of flouring, you could butter and cocoa your pan. If you're doing a chocolate cake, just so it doesn't get that floury surface, it has that nice chocolatey coating. You can do that as well. And you know, it's funny, for this particular recipe, I don't use cake flour because I find it's a little too delicate. This is like a really fudgy chocolate cake. It's like really, you know, just like you're going to see when I cut into it. It's like very fudgy. So for this, I prefer all-purpose, but you can definitely experiment with cake flour if you prefer it. You will get like a little bit of a lighter result. Perfect. All right. All right, great. So that's it. So our cake is going to bake at 350. It takes about 35 to 40 minutes. Don't overbake it, because you're going to take the whole fun out of it if you overbake it. So as soon as you can press and it sort of springs back to the touch, even in the middle, if you test it with like a toothpick or something like that, it should have some fudgy bits. You always want to underbake chocolate cake just slightly, just to make sure it stays really, really fudgy and moist. Same like, imagine chocolate chip cookies. You want to underbake them just a touch to keep them really delicious. So I'm going to set this aside because I already have one baked. So I will bake that one later. But let me grab it. Hold on.
Movie magic.
Movie magic. Yeah. Made chocolate cake. Hello. And you're like, how are you picking up this cake? So I put a cake board. I cut this when the cake was already on it. So excuse my points here. But I put a 8-inch or 9-inch cake board underneath and just trimmed it because we're going to be doing so many things with this cake. We're going to coat it in buttercream. We're going to glaze it. So you're going to want to be able to pick it up and move it at all times. So having a cake board, or you could take, you know, a leftover cardboard box and use that if you don't have a cake board on hand. Anything like that would be helpful. And it looks like a brownie, right? It's so fudgy, so moist, so delicious. And when I took it out of the pan, so you'll see in the recipe to cool it on a rack. So I always cool it mound side down. So you see, this is the bottom part. This is where the parchment was. And see how it's super, super flat? That's going to help us later when we're glazing. So make sure you do flip it over as you unmold it, which should happen naturally anyway. Ready? So we're going to make some buttercream. So the key is when you're doing something like this, if you're coating and glazing a cake, to chill it before you use it. So whether that's in the freezer, if you're in a little bit of a rush, or in the refrigerator, at least like 30 minutes. It should feel nice and cool. After it cools completely, it should then pick up a chill. So this way our buttercream is going to set up pretty fast, and our glaze also is going to set up pretty fast. So I'm going to leave this in the fridge while we prepare our buttercream. So I'm going to remove this step. And this is just an American style buttercream. Nothing fancy, but it is very tasty. So I do have a stand mixer for this, although you could just use a handheld mixer as well. I think you can see this, hopefully. Let's bring back our stuff here. So this is all our toppings. So I've got my butter. So I've got 3/4 of a cup of butter, and this is at room temperature, like I said. I'm just going to pop it in. We're going to start with that and just sort of beat it up until it's really nice and creamy. Working it. We work in it. American style buttercream is so fast and so easy. Got a spatula. Now, if you're baking along and you're doing this, you can see at this point my butter is smooth, but it's not quite fluffy yet. So it's helpful with buttercream, not just to improve the texture for that really nice airy texture, but also to build the volume of your buttercream. It's helpful to kind of whip your butter for a good few minutes. Here in class, I kind of always skip that step and I just sort of go for it because I don't want you to wait for me. But I would definitely whip this until it's really nice and light and fluffy for at least like 3 to 4 minutes. And I think Mexican vanilla is delicious, by the way, in case you're asking. Yes. And this attachment is my paddle. This is my paddle attachment. So I'm going to add about half my sugar just to keep from getting, like a big sugar cloud everywhere. And a little bit of my milk. And you'll see in the recipe the milk is divided a little bit because once we take a portion of our buttercream out for our chocolate, we're going to want to add a little bit of milk just to kind of balance the texture. So my vanilla bean paste going in, and you could just measure this by your heart, and a pinch of salt. And actually, buttercream, to be fair, always needs more than a pinch of salt. If you use salted butter for your buttercream, that's delicious too. Oh, and ermine buttercream. I love ermine buttercream. And I am using whole milk in this as well. I'm actually a new convert to ermine buttercream, or ermine frosting, really. But it's so custardy and delicious. I just made that the other day and I was like, I love this. This is great. I never make it because it's like 2 steps. You have to cook a pudding. But it's great. Paddle attachment is best for this part of the cake. Yes. We'll do an ermine buttercream in a class one day. That'd be so much fun. All right, a little bit more. I added the rest of my sugar. Now I'm adding a little bit more milk. And it's funny because depending on the temperature of your butter, if I was making this in the middle of summer and my butter is on the warmer side, you're going to need less milk for your buttercream. So if your buttercream ever comes out soupy or a little too soft, always add just a little bit of milk at a time. You can always add more. You can't really take it out. So just a little bit. Is ermine pipeable? It is. It's not as stable as like a meringue buttercream or American style buttercream because it does have the custard in it. But it's pipeable. Yeah. Vanilla essence over vanilla paste. I'm very partial to vanilla bean paste. I'm a little in love with vanilla. It's a little weird. I really like. So I'm partial to that. But any kind of vanilla you love, if you open it up and you take a whiff and that's delicious, then do it. All right. This is looking nice. So check out this guy. Ooh, this is creamy. It's nice and smooth and fluffy, which is good. So if you're using something like a tip like this, like a Russian piping tip, what's funny about this is if my buttercream is too loose, it's not going to hold the shape of my petals. If it's too stiff, it's not going to come out properly. You're going to lose the center, sometimes might get stuck. So it's a balance. So something like this, which is like thick and pipeable, but not necessarily great for coating a cake. Like a little bit on the thicker side is very good for something like this. For our chocolate buttercream, that's why we're going to add a little bit more milk to thin it out once our our cocoa goes in. So I'm going to set aside some of this for my flowers, just the way it is. And then we're going to beat in our cocoa powder and milk for our chocolate buttercream. So I'm going to take about, I'm going to leave about a third of this for my chocolate. So I'm just going to sort of like flatten it out so I know how much I'm taking. And I'm going to put it in here. Oh, excuse me. Hey, okay. Keep you going. All right, so I'm going to start with about half. Take a little bit more. That's pretty good. I think that's pretty good. And the beauty of like a chocolate American buttercream is that you can really do it by eye. And put this aside for my flowers. We're going to color that. And for my chocolate, I'm going to put my paddle back in. I'm going to add that tablespoon of cocoa you see there in the recipe. And just beat that in first. And then we'll thin it out as needed with a little bit of milk. I love my Breville mixer. Somebody just asked how I like my Breville. I love my Breville. And I don't know if they sell these anymore. Do they? It's the best size. I have 6-quart KitchenAids. I have 4 6-quart KitchenAids in my basement. I never use them. I always use the Breville, and it's smaller. It's like a 5-quart, but it's great. I love the motor on it. I feel like it's such a great, I love this mixer. I don't know if they make these anymore. So I'm adding just a splash of milk. Yeah, I love this mixer. This is like my baby. I love this. All right, well, pretty good. I'm just gonna scrape it down so I don't have too much vanilla buttercream running through my chocolate buttercream. But you can see the texture on this. It's a little softer than our other one. It's like a little creamy, spreadable. This is just to coat our cake before our glaze goes on. So you want a smooth coat. Mm. And it tastes very nice. You could always add an extra pinch of salt to chocolate buttercream. That's always nice. All right, so we're going to start by coating our cake. I'm going to put this glaze stuff aside for a minute. I'm going to bring over, now I have a turntable. You don't really need one for this recipe. It looks so good over. Thanks, Ilse. You don't need a turntable for this, but it's helpful because then you can just sort of turn it. But if you don't have one, it's not a problem. So again, my cake is chilled. It's nicely chilled. And to keep it in place on here, I'm just going to put like a moist paper towel. Or if you have a silicone mat or something like that, you could do that as well. But just to kind of keep it from moving around while I'm coating. And to do that, I've got offset spatulas. And depending on your comfort level, you can use a big one for this, or you can use a mini. Sometimes the mini on a single layer of cake like this, the mini is kind of easier to use. So we might start with that. And I'm just going to take my buttercream, just give it a plop right on the top. And it doesn't have to be perfectly smooth. The beauty of this is that it's really like a base coat before a glaze goes on. So if you're not great at getting like a super smooth coating on your cakes, that's okay for this. Not going to be a problem. All it does is sort of give your cake a little bit more of that delicious buttercream kind of topping because we're really only getting it from our flowers otherwise. But it also kind of gives you that base coat so the glaze goes on nice and smooth. So you can see I kind of smoothed out the top a little, and I'm just going to work it down to the sides. If you wanted to, you could also reserve some of this to do, you could pipe a little border if you wanted to at the base of the cake. Just working my way around. And even if you didn't want to glaze it, you can kind of just swoop this all over. That would be delicious too. For frosting, dairy cream or no? Jerry, which better for finishing? Explain that to me one more time. Dairy cream or no? All right, so I'm going to switch to this big one just to kind of smooth out my top. And again, this doesn't have to be super smooth. If you want it to be super smooth, you can get out your cake scraper, your bench scraper. But all I'm doing is just kind of coating nice and even. All right, I'm going to put on my bench scraper. Can't leave it like this. Just working my way around. It's helpful to keep your bowl around just to kind of scrape off the excess. But once my sides are pretty clean, which again, they don't have to be perfect, we're going to cover them. But once they're pretty clean, I'm just going to go at like a 45-degree angle and just pull in from my sides. Just to clean up the edges. And if your cake is cold, you'll find that your buttercream is probably already starting to like set up a little bit, which is good. I have like one little knob of butter in there. Hey, you, get over there. Silly butter. So as soon as you're smoothish to the level that you're comfortable with, we're going to chill this again while we make our glaze. And if you have room in the freezer, it's helpful to do that in the freezer, but I don't right now, so I'm going to put it in the fridge. But if you do have space, that's even better. It's going to help it set up a little bit. And we're also going to color our buttercream for our flowers. So this is good to go. Don't worry about the bottom so much. Again, I have like a little extra buttercream. I might pipe a border. If you want, you can go all the way to the base. You could do it on, whatever your serving platter is going to be. But we're going to be moving it to a rack to glaze. So, a little bit tricky there. This is sort of like a multi-step process. All right, so I'm going to get this in the fridge. And we're going to do some colors. So we don't need too many colors for this, which is helpful. We do need green for leaves. And the leaves really, I would not skip on the leaves because the leaves really take it over the top. I've got pink. I've got some red. And when you use floral tips, it's nice to have a two-tone color situation. Hi, home baker. I want to know which cream is better for dairy cream or non-dairy cream for cream cake. Dairy. But again, like you could use any, whatever your preference is, especially if there are dietary preferences or needs. You can mix it up. But yeah, I tend to use like whole milk, use half and half. So we don't need a ton of flowers. So I've got a little bit for flowers. That's going to be, we don't need a ton for leaves, excuse me. So that's for my green. This is going to be like a pink-red situation. I'm going to do a little bit of a purple. And maybe I'll save this in case I want to do a border. Yeah, I'll do a pink border. That'd be even more fun. Okay. And here's where you can really play because this could be anything you want. You could do the flowers. You don't have to do the flowers. But you can kind of have fun with this. So whenever I make leaves, I'm adding a green gel color. And gel color is always preferable over liquid no matter what you're making because it's just going to give you the most vibrant color without thinning out your batch there. You see, this is going to be a very bright green. And if I want to kind of like give this a little bit more of that like earthy feel, sometimes I add a drop of brown to my green also. If you're doing springtime stuff, you could add a drop of yellow. That kind of gives it a little bit more brightness. I'm going to do pink here, and I'm going to turn part of it into red after I pink it. So I don't need multiple bowls, just for this one color. It's a nice pink. All right, let's do a little bit of purple. This is like a violet. Oh yeah, so these are the gel colors. These are the satin ice from Michaels. It comes in like a pack. I think it came in a pack of 10. Well, but they're great. One more spoon. What I do like about satin ice violet, and I feel like I talked about this before, but if you use other brands like Americolor, sometimes you'll find their purple is like a little bit blue. This is such a nice violet. Like it's just such a lovely violet. So that's really nice. All right, so some of these I'm going to get into the bag. The pink I'm also going to turn into a little bit of red. So I've got piping bags here. You could use fabric piping bags. You could use plastic. I'm going to load them in by first folding down the top just to keep my edge nice and clean. And I do like to pop them into some sort of like a drinking glass or something like that just to hold it for me. So we'll start with this guy. This is my leaf tip. And if you don't have a leaf tip, you see it's sort of like a V shape. You can actually cut your piping bag just to create this same V shape, even just your plastic piping bag. So if you're missing that tip, don't let it deter you. You could still make leaves. Once my tip is in, oh, hi. You can see I sort of cut it just right below the top. So this way it's not going to pop out, especially because we're working with a little bit more of a stiff buttercream. And I do like to just give it a twist and kind of stuff it in just to keep anything from coming out the other side. And that tends to be more helpful for things like macaroon batter or thinner batters. Buttercream really isn't going anywhere, but it's sort of a force of habit. So it's nice. All right, my green is going in. Emma. He's ready for leaves. He's got purple, we've got pink. So for my purple, I've got this just small, like a star, just to make little swirly mobobs. The shelf life of gel color, I find my gel color lasts forever, but you do have to store it properly. If for some reason, like you left the cap a little bit open, you know, it does sort of crust out and dry out a little bit. But I would say at least a year, if not longer. You could even just pop the whole container, you know, once everything's closed up, you could pop them all into like a little airtight container or a zip top bag and just store them that way, because so they have a nice airtight seal. Now, this is going to be special. This is going to be for our floral tip. So instead of traditionally filling the bag like we just did, we're actually going to paint the bag. So I'm going to put my tip in first. And this is sort of like a rose tip, and you see how big and chunky it is. So you got to go, you got to go pretty far down. So you see, same thing, just cut like right near the top. And now I'm going to take some of my pink and just sort of spoon it against the side of the bag. And you could do vice versa also. If you like a darker color on the inside, on the outside, and a lighter color on the inside. All I'm doing is sort of swirling it around just to coat the bag. So when I put my red buttercream in there, it's going to kind of go right into the middle. I just made a whole mix. Hold on. And I think I'm going to load up the whole bag. And then whatever I have left, I could use for a border when I'm done. So for the rest of these, I'm just going to go red. So I've got this is like a deep rouge. My cake finishing is not good. What can I do for that? I would say like trying out different designs. You know, starting rustic is always good and getting a handle on just sort of like cleanly coating a cake with buttercream, even doing those sort of like swoopy designs just to get more and more comfortable. And you could always practice with styrofoam cakes. That's like, in the bakery world, if you are not great at finishing cakes, instead of going through so many cakes, you could just buy styrofoam dummies and you can get those online and just practice and then just swoop the buttercream off and practice again. You can even use something like a tub of Cool Whip to practice so you're not making frosting. And Cool Whip is actually surprisingly resilient. You can use it multiple times and just get really comfortable. I had the wilting frosting bag holder. Oh, that's nice. That's lovely. Fabulous. All right. So I'm putting my red right in the middle. And I'm not being too careful about this. If you're very like, I want my red directly in the middle, you could take a piping bag to fill it right in the center. I kind of like when the colors swirl together a little bit because flowers, are kind of just whatever flowers are. It doesn't need to be perfect. I'm going to push it down. And we're going to get this sort of two-tone. We might get some more red in places. We might get some more pink in places, but it'll be kind of fun. All right. So the last thing we need to do is glaze our cake. And again, if you skip this step and you just coat it in buttercream, that's great too. But the glaze kind of takes it to that next level. So I've got chocolate. I've got salt. I've got oil. And on the stove, I just put my heavy cream in a small pot and I'm just bringing it to a simmer. So this is like a very simple chocolate ganache that we're going to thin out with a little bit of oil. Very fast. It's almost ready. Let me clean my whisk. Okay. Tasting too bland and buttery. I mean, buttery is good for buttercream, but yeah, if your buttercream is on the bland side, it's typically a lack of salt. It's usually what it is, just a lack of salt. So I would switch to salted butter just to try it, or just adding a little bit more vanilla, whatever flavors you love, just amp up that flavor for sure. Yours turned out lumpy. The buttercream turned out lumpy. If it did, it means your butter was a little too cold. You could take like a warm, like a hot towel, run your towel under really hot water, put it under your bowl, give your buttercream a minute to warm up, and then beat it again. And repeat that until the lumps work out. You could also use a blowtorch if you have one of those. I love blowtorch for that purpose. All right, so I brought my heavy cream to a simmer. Now I have chocolate. So these are just like nice chocolate chunks kind of thing. You want to use a chocolate that's like a higher quality chocolate for ganache. That's something that you would really love to snack on. So like maybe like a chocolate chip that's a little bit on the sweeter side might not be the best for this purpose. We actually had a truffle class recently, and I kind of talked about chocolate a little bit there too, so you check that out. But higher quality chocolate, something with like a percentage on the label tends to be a little bit more high quality. Usually that kind of is a key that it has a little bit more cocoa butter in the mix, so it's going to melt a little bit easier and smoother. Oh, and the flip side, so somebody's buttercream came out too loose. So if that's the case, maybe a little bit more milk. So you're going to have to balance by adding a little bit more powdered sugar and beating it in. So always watch that milk. Make sure you add a little bit at a time. And if you're in a warm environment, it's amazing how much moisture the butter itself will give to your buttercream. So sometimes even less milk than what the recipe calls for. But good thing with American buttercream, you can always balance with a little bit more confectioner sugar. And if your ganache turned out lumpy, then you could heat it a little bit more on the stovetop, just over very low heat, whisking constantly until your chocolate is melted. You can see mine melted most of the way. I'm going to give it a second. If for some reason I have any chunks that don't melt completely, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to put it back over a very, very low heat because you don't want to scorch the chocolate, and just let it smooth out. So I'm going to do that for just a second. Let's do that. In the meantime, I'm going to get my offset spatula ready. And don't be like me. If you're doing this, keep whisking your ganache. Don't leave it like that. That's very dangerous. Chocolate loves to burn. Okay, so it's smooth. It's silky, it's smooth. Yeah, even after adding the oil, definitely. You can always heat it up a bit. And you can even, when you're making ganache, even if you could make it ahead and store it in the refrigerator and it's going to firm up, same idea. You just heat it back up on the stovetop to make it pourable again. You can see I'm just whisking in my oil, and that sort of thins the consistency. So before it was a very thick ganache. Now I have sort of a pourable ganache. So yours should be somewhat smooth and pourable. Should kind of like coat a spoon. I just use any sort of like, inexpensive oil, vegetable, canola, whatever you like. Something that isn't going to compete with the flavor of the chocolate. Now you do want to make sure that that oil is really emulsified in. So your ganache shouldn't look broken in any way. It should look nice and smooth. Everything should look really cohesive. If for some reason it's broken, which can happen if it's like overheated or not whisked properly, you could even throw it in a blender or use an immersion blender just to bring it back together. And that will work as well. Have you ever made a mirror glazed cake? Yes. That's next level glazing. But yes, definitely. All right. So I do have a baking sheet with a rack for glazing. That's going to be helpful. If you don't have one of those, you could just kind of go slowly and just let the glaze sort of drip down, and that would be fun too. So I've got my cake. It's nice and chilled. Put it right on your rack. And all we're going to do is just pour glaze all over it. Are you ready? Yes. You're going to want a spatula. All I have left is this one, but we're going to use it. Just to make sure it all kind of comes out in one shot. I'm just going right over the top. I'm going to kind of move it around. Save a little bit in the pot because you're going to want to kind of touch up the sides a little bit. And don't spread it too thin on the top. Let it sort of coat. Now, see any areas I missed, which is hard to tell from this angle. Just kind of, yeah, take your spatula. Hello. And just kind of see how it just kind of fills it in. It all just works together. I'll turn that around at some point so I can see. Same thing on my other side. And then before it sets it's too much, we're just going to give it a little bit of like a tap. Just to kind of settle it down a little bit. I sort of mentioned a blowtorch before. If you have a blowtorch, if you have any air bubbles in your ganache, it's fun to like very lightly just take your blowtorch and that'll pop any air bubbles that you've got. But that's really helpful as well. So I feel like I've got full coverage. If anything bothers you, like if it isn't super smooth on the sides, you could take your little offset and just work your way around, but you don't want to fuss with it too much. You'd be surprised. Glaze doesn't love being played with too much. But as long as it's covered and it's pretty smooth, you're good to go. So before we add our flowers, we're going to chill this again. So instead of chilling it on this rack, because I don't want it to get stuck to the rack in any way and give me problems, this is the time I'm going to move it to my serving platter. So any sort of platter that you have, if you want to glue it down with like a little bit of buttercream, just put a dollop of buttercream right in the middle. And then I'm just going to pick it up because it's on the cake board. It's nice and easy. And when you're holding it in the air, you can kind of go under and just clean up some of that excess from the sides, just so it isn't going to kind of like drip around it on your board. Just clean it up a little. And we'll put it right down. Ooh. Good. Wash it. So we want to chill it because if we try to pipe our flowers right on it, obviously it's just going to kind of smoosh the ganache everywhere and make a big mess. So you want it to be pretty firm. So we'll give that a second. We'll clear out some of the stuff, make space. And then we'll be ready to rock and roll. What do you do if your ganache ends up too loose and it's just falling off the cake? It might just be too warm if your ratios were right. And it's funny because depending on the type of chocolate. So for example, I was measuring in ounces. I think the recipe is 5 ounces of chocolate. So that's like a little under a cup of chocolate chips. Now, chocolate chips have more stabilizers than a high quality chocolate that maybe you're chopping up from a bar. So a bar chocolate is going to melt smoother. It's going to be a little bit thinner in consistency. Chocolate chips kind of always stay a little solid when you melt them. It's not going to drip right off your cake, but I don't I don't recommend using chocolate chips. So like a high quality chocolate, if your ganache is too thin, always feel it, get the temperature. If it's feeling really warm, give it a second to come to room temperature, let it cool down a little bit before it goes on the cake. If it ran right off your cake and it's a mess, don't worry, just chill your cake. Take off any excess ganache you can get off without getting the buttercream in the mix. Take the ganache that's left under your rack, repurpose that back into your pot. Wait out your cake until it's firm. Your ganache is sort of at room temperature, and then just do it one more time, and it should be fine. Chili in a cake board. I don't think I read that right. Okay. Chill it on a cake board. Yes. What do you think?
Definitely
Oh,
says chili
yeah,
in a
it's
cake
like
board.
chili
So
on a cake board. I don't know.
maybe it's a new recipe.
It's a new recipe. Sally's like, oops, sorry. Never mind. All right. So I don't want to rush it, but I am going to pull it out because we're getting to like the last 10 minutes of class. In the meantime, I'm going to just push my buttercream to the edge so I'm ready. And you can, if you're curious about your flowers, before you start piping on your cake, you can test one. So it could just be on a plate or on a spatula. I'm just going to test. So I'm going to push and just pull up and I get a little flower. That wasn't the best flower I've ever made. There we go. You can see it just pipes a flower, just like magic. So this was our tester. We'll repurpose that buttercream after, just to make sure we're at the right consistency. And if you test it and it's getting stuck in your tip, that means it's too thick. If it's coming out but it's not holding the shape of the petals, it's too thin. So just chill it for a minute to kind of stiffen it up. And if it's too thick, you might want to beat in a little bit more milk. That would be good too. All right. So the way you put your flowers on is up to you. I think when I made this for the class, I sort of did like a thing. So I'll do that again today, just for fun. Are you holding it at 45 degrees? So I'm just holding it straight up and down, not angling at all. If you do want the flowers to angle, you can angle it a bit. But to start with, on the top of my cake, I'm just going straight up and down. Oh, I'm just piping. And my ganache is still like a little warm, so it's like smooshing a little bit, but that's okay. You can see if your ganache is warm, your flowers are going to have a harder time sticking as well. Now, if you want it to come down the side, you can kind of just go down the side, which I don't know if it's going to work because my ganache is soft. But we'll try it. I feel like this one's going to make an escape. Now, if you want to fill in with the others, you're going to see once the leaves go in, it kind of gets to the next level. I'm just going to do some like little rosettes and things like that. Just to almost make a bouquet. Now, you could do more types of flowers. You could use all of your floral tips to kind of fill in all different flowers. And you see when the leaves go in, these are really fun. They just sort of give it a little bit more interest. Put them anywhere you feel. Any spots you feel like need a little fun. Got some gold dragées for funsies. You could also use like the spray on luster. Could luster the whole cake. Oh, thanks, guys. It's a little messy because my ganache is like very much warm, right? but it looks fun. Because I do want to have time to cut in to just show you the inside also. Now, if I wanted to, I could go back and just do a border. So I've got like a little bit of this left. Maybe we'll take one more of those star tips. And just do a quick bottom. But yeah, make sure, don't be like me. Make sure your ganache is really nice and cool before you take your flowers on. And let's feel this. We'll see how far around the cake I get with this. Let's feel what's left. And you can use a coupler, absolutely, for sure. If you're using the same color for multiple tips, that's always a good idea to use a coupler. I'm going to kind of stretch my border a little bit because I'm low on buttercream, so I'm going to do a shell, but like a really stretched out shell. Just to kind of finish it off. Does it need to stay refrigerated? I would. I would keep it in the refrigerator until you're serving because you want it to soften up. You don't want to serve it cold. I would let it come to room temperature before I served. So even like a half an hour at room temperature. But you can store this cake in the refrigerator for up to a couple of days. It's tricky because of everything you've got going on. So make sure you really, I know the border really makes it. Make sure it's really well chilled before you wrap it or anything like that. I wouldn't even wrap a cake that's glazed because it's sort of so delicate. And if the plastic touches, you're going to ruin your glaze. So like a large airtight, like a cake container would be good for this. You can just make the cake itself ahead. You could freeze it for up to a month, even with the buttercream layer, and then just glaze it on the day of serving and finish your flowers. That would be good too. But I do want to cut it just so you can see the inside. Because it's so yummy. Oh, thanks. It's so delicious. And to cut cakes, you're not using the hot water method. You absolutely should. A knife and a glass of hot water, paper towel or towel just to kind of wipe it off. Let's see if I have a plate here. A small flowery plate. That'll be cute. So just dip it in the hot water, nice clean cut, wipe it off. I'll cut in over here because the other side is so pretty. Dip between cuts. I know. You don't want to cut it, but I'm totally going to eat this for lunch. So, so I'm going to cut it. But yeah, for sure. All right, just going to steal this out of here. Oh my God, wait till you see this. Can you see how fudgy this is? Oh my God. Look at that. Look at that cake. Look how fudgy. And with the buttercream and the ganache. Oh Lord. Oh Lord. And this chocolate cake is good for not just for this. I mean, you could use this recipe for like all different This is it. Give it to me. I know, it's so good. This is my favorite chocolate cake, like no contest. But it's great for, you could turn this into layer cakes. You can use this recipe for anything, and it's one bowl. It's so fast and so easy. I'm afraid to put this in my mouth because I'm gonna get chocolate everywhere. All right, maybe I'll say goodbye before I eat it. I'm gonna be like, bye. Thank you so much. Come back next week for Pavlova. Elsa, you're gonna have to talk for the rest.
Yes, come back next week, guys, and make sure to try this recipe. As you can see, it looks amazing.
It's
And
really
if it
good.
leaves your mouth looking like a mess, you know it's good.
It's incredible. It's so good. Yeah, please try it. Thank you so much. See you next week.
Bye bye, everyone.